Hello, Business 630. Professor Hasse here. Week number 4 of our corporate finance class. This is Monday, September 13th. This is our introduction video to our week's work. And then we'll post my lecture video tomorrow evening, Tuesday, for you to review. Our topic this week is the cost of capital and capital budgeting. What are alternatives to the weighted average cost of capital? And how do we maximize the firm's value by allocating financial resources? That, in other words, picking an asset that's going to give us the greatest return. How do we pick and choose that asset? It's called capital budgeting. That's chapters 9 and 10 we'll study this week. We have a couple of sample spreadsheets to look at in our lecture video this week. So that's what we'll be concentrating on in our topics in this week number 4, our halfway point of our class, if you can believe it. We're also going to talk about the Electrics Incorporated group case, where I have notified you of your team assignments. We're going to review that in our introduction video today, but also in our review session or our class lecture section for this week number 4. This all leads up to the next graded work you have, which is case number 2, which is on chapters 9, 10, and 11, which we'll talk about, which will be posted next week and due on Sunday, September 26th. Couple of things to highlight on our week number 4 from our Blackboard site. If you go to the case study file folder, you'll now see the files associated with hang on just a sec. One moment, please. I gotta go back stop there. There we go. Went to the wrong file. Here's our Blackboard site, and if you go to case study, you will see the case assessment or the case for Electrics Corporation. It's made up of a few files. One is in PDF, one is in Word doc, the same type of file. That's your case, your description of the case. Then you have a rubric, which explains the grading of the case. And then I've given you, in this case, a sample case paper to review. Now, since this is a group project, and here are the teams again for the group, each one of you, each team, there's 9 of them, submit a paper. Each team member is responsible for certain questions on page 4 of the case. And one is market review, one is capital budget analysis, one is risk analysis. So each team member, you decide amongst yourself, what do you want to do? So what I urge you all to do this week, since we have no real grade work this week, is to download this case assessment files, read them, get together with your team, and this week decide who's going to do what, which team member. Now, a couple of teams have 4 members, so you'll have to just split that up accordingly. So it's the team's responsibility to tell me who's in charge of what. Once you have that decided, I have a discussion board set up where you can go on as your team and post who on your team is doing what. So that's your task this week, is to download and read the assessment case, determine on your team who's going to be doing what, and then letting me know by the end of the week. This is not for a grade, this is just to get to organize. We're going to talk about this case and review it in my course lecture later on this week. So that's that work on the electrics case. There's your teams. Also, you will see here in each one of you will see a group case page, where you can't see it in this one because it's set up for each individual team. You go to the electrics case project groups and you'll see your group, and that's how you'll know who you have and how to get organized. So again, we'll review this in our lecture video on Tuesday evening. So that's your case. It's a group case. Each team member is responsible for a certain section of the case. You put it all together and put together your paper. All right. That's your task this week, is to get organized and review it. All right. I will get your case study number 1 grades to you by the end of the week, as soon as all the postings are made. And our topic for this week, in week number 4, is the cost of capital and capital budgeting. So please review these details in your Blackboard. And also now I'm going to show you a video explaining the cost of capital.
In this video, we're going to talk about something called the weighted average cost of capital, which is commonly abbreviated as WACC. So we're going to talk about what it is and how you would go about calculating it, and then we'll walk through an example. So when we think about WACC, this weighted average cost of capital, really what we've got is we've got the financing of the firm. So we've got a firm here. Now this firm is going to be financed from two primary sources. One is debt and one is equity. What does that mean? Well, the firm can get money from borrowing, or people can put up equity, shareholders or the owner themselves. So what we're thinking about here is we're looking at this mix of debt and equity, and then we're going to go ahead and basically calculate cost for each one. The cost of equity, that's the RE, and then the cost of debt, after factoring in the tax considerations. And we're basically going to assign a cost to each one. But we have to weight these costs, right? Because we don't know how much of the mix this debt or the equity is. Okay, so the debt for the firm might be just 10% of its financing, whereas the equity is the other 90%. So we can't just go ahead and say we'll take a 50-50 split. So this is going to make more sense when we go through an example, but for right now, just let me walk you through this formula. So the weighted average cost of capital is equal to, we've got the firm's equity. Now, depending if you take finance, so you'll be using the market value of the firm's equity, and if you're taking an accounting course, it might just settle for the book value of equity. But in any case, we'll just call it equity here. The firm's equity divided by the total of the firm's debt and equity. Now, when we're talking about debt here, what we mean is interest-bearing debt. Interest-bearing. So we're not just talking about liabilities in general, which might include things like unearned revenue. We want to talk about interest-bearing debt. Bonds that the firm has or something like that. So this is right here, what we're trying to do is calculate that proportion of the firm that is being financed by equity. Okay, and then what we're going to do is once we've got that proportion, right, this share of the financing that is attributable to equity, we're going to multiply it by the cost of the firm's equity. Right? That's what RE is commonly. This is the cost of equity. Let me just write that here. Cost of the firm's equity, right? And that'll be something like 8%, 9%, 15%. It depends on the firm, but the main idea here is that we have to figure out the proportion of the firm that is financed by equity and then multiply that by the cost associated with that equity. Now we've got, so this is all kind of one big component of WACC is the equity side, but now we've got the debt side, right? So debt is part of this financing of the firm. And so now we have to say, okay, well, we'll take a look at the firm's interest-bearing debt and then see what proportion that is of the debt plus equity. So what proportion is the debt of the firm's financing? And then we're going to multiply that by the cost of debt. Okay, this would be like the yield to maturity on the bonds or something like that. Maybe that's 6% yield to maturity. So the cost of the firm's debt. And then we're going to multiply that by 1 minus the tax rate. Now, why are we doing that? Because we have to remember that we want the after-tax cost of debt because there's a tax shield associated with interest. We'll have a different video on that, but just bear in mind that's why we're multiplying by 1 less the tax rate due to this tax shield. So basically, all we're really doing, we've got a big long equation here to calculate WACC, but all we're really doing is saying what is the proportion of the firm that is financed by equity and what's the proportion that is financed by debt. Okay, and then we're going to take those proportions, those weights, and then we're going to multiply them by the associated costs, the cost of equity and the cost of debt. So let's go ahead and let's work through an example, and I think that you'll find it to be a lot easier when we do that. So we've got an example here where you start a firm, and you start this firm by borrowing $2,000 from the bank, and that $2,000, the bank's going to charge you 6% interest, and then you put up some of your own money, some equity of $8,000, And then let's just say, this calculating the cost of equity is a whole nother video. You can use things like the capital asset pricing model. But right now, let's just say that that's 12.5% without getting into how that we actually calculate that. So then we say, well, we've got a tax rate of 40%. So now we can go ahead and we can just plug the numbers in to this formula that we have here, right? So in the interest of space, I'm going to try and do that down here right below our example. So let's just go through this step by step. So move down a little bit further. So the WACC, our weighted average cost of capital. See, we can't just take these two and say, okay, let's add those up and divide by 2, right? Why can't we do that? Well, because debt is only 2,000 of the financing and equity is 8,000, right? I hope you understand kind of the idea, the concept behind why we're doing this. So the WACC is going to be equal to, and we'll have, let's do the equity side first. So we've got $8,000 in equity, right? So to calculate the proportion of equity, we say 8,000 over 2,000 of debt plus 8,000 of equity. Why are we doing this? Well, look, we've got $8,000 in equity up here, but we know that the firm's total financing is both of these, right? It's 2,000 plus 8,000. So to get the proportion, we're taking 8,000 and then dividing it by that total. And basically what we're seeing here is that, we're going to have 0.8 or 80% or however we want to think of it, the financing is coming from this equity source. But now we have to multiply this by the cost of equity, which is 12.5%, which is the same as 0.125. All right, so now we've got kind of the equity component here. Change colors, and now we have to add in the cost, the weighted average cost of this debt here. So now we're going to go and basically do something very similar. Just take now the 2,000, which is this debt, but now we have to weight that. We have to take the proportion of that. So now that's 2,000 over 2,000 plus 8,000. Okay. Now we're going to multiply that by the cost of debt. That's 6%. So that's the same as 0.06. But now we have to factor in that after-tax cost of debt. So what we're going to have is 1 minus the tax rate, 1 minus t, which is 1 minus 0.4. T is just the tax rate. And so now we've got this big long equation, but let me just save you the math here. So our WACC, if we take this whole piece right here, what that comes out to is 0.0072. Okay, and now this piece over here, if we calculate that, this piece here, this first piece is actually 0.1. So this is 0.1. Apologize there. And then this piece is 0.0072. So we add these together, and it's 0.1072, and that is equivalent to, and we think about a percentage, so a little easier conceptually, 10.72%. So the weighted average cost of capital for this firm that we started here is 10.72%. Now let's go back here for a minute. Now if you calculate and you say, okay, let's add up 6% and 12.5%, and let's just say, we'll divide it by 2 and get the cost of capital. Well, what you're doing is now you're just getting, we can call it the average cost of capital, right? Because you're just taking two different costs of capital, the debt cost and the equity cost, and you're just saying let's just divide that by 2. Let's just average it. But we're not taking just the average because we recognize that there are different weights that should be assigned here because 80% of our firm is actually being financed by equity. So more weight is being given to the equity component of our cost of capital. And that's why we call it the weighted average cost of capital.
Tennis is easy, but you know what isn't easy? Finding some.
Okay, so our lecture this week will talk about weighted average cost of capital, you probably all have studied before. But what are alternatives to weighted average cost of capital? What can companies do that's as part of their capital budgeting analysis that's different from the weighted average cost? How another way they could measure cost of capital? One would be inflation. One would be inflation as a cost of capital. So we'll talk about this in our lecture this week. The key thing this week is to get familiar with the electrics case, get your team's responsibilities down, and we'll go into that in great length in our lecture tomorrow, posted tomorrow evening, Tuesday. So look forward to seeing you then. If you have yet to post case number 1, please do so in the next day or so I can get those grades out to you. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.